Hello, I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching Context. Russian and Ukrainian delegations are in Istanbul for a second round of peace talks, hours after both sides carried out overnight attacks. On Sunday, Kyiv launched 117 drones on military bases deep inside Russia, after Moscow's largest ever aerial attack on Ukraine the previous night. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is currently in Lithuania for a summit with allies, says there's a real opportunity to try to end the war. The demands that Ukraine brought to Istanbul include a total and unconditional ceasefire in the sky, on land and at sea. Kyiv is asking for the unconditional return of all deportees and illegally displaced persons, including Ukrainian children, and the exchange of all prisoners. It also calls for no repetition of the aggression and guarantees of security and commitment from the international community. However, there's little hope this round of talks will yield a breakthrough. The atmosphere around the negotiations is far from promising. Moscow has still not handed over a document outlining its demands, something that Kyiv has said is essential for a productive meeting. Meanwhile, Ukrainian proposals leaked yesterday by Reuters are unlikely to satisfy Russia. So why are both sides still turning up today? Likely to avoid angering US President Donald Trump, who sees the mere fact of the meeting as a personal diplomatic win. Both Moscow and Kyiv are seeking to gain leverage through their relationship with the White House, and skipping the talks could have risked straining ties with Washington. An earlier round of talks in Turkey last month failed to bring about any significant outcome apart from a prisoner of war swap. Joining me now to discuss the talks and their likely outcomes is former diplomat Gustavo de Aristegui. Thank you for being with us. Now, to start off with, so these talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations, they're underway as we speak. What's the latest?
Well, it was very obvious that even the United States, that was trying to broker these talks, didn't believe much in the outcome of this particular round of these talks. In fact, Steve Witkoff, who is the main special envoy of the President of the United States to most conflicts, or even all conflicts, didn't attend these meetings, and he has sent General Keith Kellogg. Of course, General Keith Kellogg is formally the envoy for Russia and Ukraine, although he did have some problems in the beginning of his appointment, when he did show very strong commitment to defending the positions that everybody in the west of Europe and from the central east to Western Europe actually believe that are the right thing to defend. That is territorial integrity, never again an aggression, the return of the deportees and those that were displaced illegally, and especially the children, which constitutes, as we know, a war crime. I do think that we're probably reaching a very important moment where we will probably see a breakthrough because both are trying to see an end to this conflict. They are trying to see peace in their own proper ways. Let's hope that it is true, and let's hope, even if these first contacts in Istanbul have not given fruit, let's hope that in future contacts they will reach some kind of an agreement, at least for a ceasefire. We will see if at least a line of control, even if it's not an international border, will eventually come true.
So you've touched on this already. Who is in attendance here, and what can we make of the fact that both sides have sent delegations rather than the highest leadership?
Well, I think that all conversations in all peace processes absolutely need to be preceded by the technicians, by those that know the nitty-gritty of the negotiations. So hopefully these delegations will be duly briefed, will know that the end game needs to be necessarily the eventual and definitive peace arrangements, even if it is not recognizing international borders. If that happens, I think that we can be optimistic.
So thinking more about the outcomes, what is each side hoping to get out of these negotiations?
Well, it is obvious that the Russians have gone back to their maximalist positions. They have said that they want to neutralize the country. That means Ukraine, that they want to demilitarize Ukraine, which is completely preposterous. Nobody's going to accept that. That they want to denazify the country. Although, of course, in the latest leakings of the positions of the Russian regime, it has been very clearly stated that all of these maximalist positions have been underplayed. On the side of the Ukrainians, obviously, everybody thought that they were weakened, right? Everybody thought that they had no cards left. Let's remember that terrible episode in the Oval Office when President Zelensky, who didn't have his finest day, by the way, but the other side didn't either. They said that they absolutely needed to have a negotiation that led to a long-lasting peace, and that they really did have cards. That these cards were the resilience of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian army, and that well, recently we've seen in this very audacious attack in the heart of Russia, be it in Siberia or in Murmansk, a very effective attack that has crippled the strategic capacity of Russia.
Yeah, so thinking more about these overnight attacks, and these talks have come amid significant attacks from both sides. Does this help or does it hinder finding a solution to end the war?
I don't think it will hinder it. Very much the contrary. The Russians thought that this was very much the end of the Ukrainians. They thought that they had the American administration on their side. They thought that they had the vice president and even the president on their side. And they've been playing this. President Putin is a very experienced, he's been in power for 25 years, knows how to play the counter side very well, and he has very clearly taken the measure of everyone that speaks to him and negotiates with him. So let's really say that the only way to reach peace in this terrible conflict that has cost hundreds of thousands of lives, not tens of thousands of lives, is definitely, most surely, knowing, or that the Russians know, that the Ukrainians still have the capacity to respond, to retaliate. So probably this can be more of a stimulus for peace than anything else.
And do you think there's something in the idea that these recent attacks were intended as a bargaining chip ahead of these negotiations?
It looks like it. In any case, it looks also like a retaliation. And let me tell you very frankly, when the Russians are trying to play the card of threatening the West, and even those that have recently joined NATO, like Finland or Sweden, what they're doing right now is not a very smart move. Let me tell you, when you actually move a resiliently convinced neutral country as Sweden to moving into joining NATO, you must have done something wrong. When you have forcefully neutralized a country in 1946, which was the case of Finland, that eventually found comfort in their neutral position, and they also move into joining NATO, it's because they feel threatened. It is because they have very advanced security and intelligence systems that tell them that they are not safe. And that is the fault of who the fault is, and that is Russia. Nobody can actually think that the West, NATO, the United States, whoever they want to blame, has been the actual they were faulty and they were responsible for the shift and change in the aggressive attitudes of Russia, because it's not true. You cannot be a friend of who wants to be your enemy. You cannot be a friend who doesn't want to be a friend of yours. This is very true, and this is something that it is a shocking reality that we have to sink in.
Now, let's turn a bit more to Washington. So the US isn't currently in Istanbul, but Washington is still playing a role here, isn't it?
Well, Washington plays the role. Even if people may not be in agreement with Trump or Witkoff or whatever, but they have all very clearly said that they are not in the business of starting war, prolonging war. They're in the business of ending wars. This is probably the most important asset of the present American administration. Trump 1.0 was very much into it. Trump 2.0 is even more into it. War, confrontation, tensions are not good for business. They are actually a destabilizing factor that has been driving markets down, the debt of the sovereign nations up, and the only way to increase interaction between countries and even probably restore and rebuild the transatlantic alliance is actually by stopping this conflict, by preventing an invasion of China of Taiwan, and probably by being very tough, very assertive in, for example, preventing or avoiding Iran from ever getting their hands on nuclear weapons.
And what outcome do you think President Trump is hoping for from these talks? And what reaction can we expect from Washington if the result of what happens in Istanbul isn't what he was hoping for?
We're very much at a very preliminary phase of the talks. The reason being that they are extremely, at each other's throats. It is a very complicated situation. Still, there is a huge animosity, a very intense animosity between Russians and Ukrainians and Russians. So the first steps have to be covered by military staff, by diplomats, and by envoys, not by the leaders. And once the problems have been sorted out and have been sort of let's call it cataloged and maybe even spoken of at the very end, you could probably have higher level delegations to actually start envisaging what can be at least a long-lasting ceasefire and a line of control, even if it is not, as I said before, an international border. This is what we can all hope for. But I think that the United States is also hoping that, well, they thought that let's call it fluid relation between President Putin and President Trump was going to help stop this war. It's not that easy. We're talking about the animosities that have been building for decades, if not centuries. Let's say that Russians think that the soul of Russia is in Ukraine, and let's say that Ukrainians say that because the soul of Russia is in Ukraine, they are prior, older, and a nation that is very much independent, and a nation that deserves to be independent, that deserves to be respected, and to live in internationally recognized and secure borders forever and ever now.
And you're highlighting here how far apart Russians and Ukrainians still are. And many analysts have said that these talks probably won't lead to any significant outcomes. What do you make of that analysis?
Well, this is exactly what has happened until now, but this is not necessarily the endgame outcome. We're just in this real second round of the talks. And I mean, if you don't think that bringing back thousands of war prisoners from one side and the other is not significant, then I don't know what is. Because that already is a great relief to the families that have seen their loved ones in the hands of the enemy. And I'm not talking just about the Ukrainians, I'm talking about the Russians too. This war is a trauma for both sides. This war is a tragedy for the region. It is a tragedy for the Russian mother and father that have their kid that died on the front or is in a Ukrainian prisoner camp, and the other way around. So the sooner we get rid of this, the sooner we will be able to stabilize one of the most sensitive regions in the world. I remember that a very good friend of mine, Ron Asmus, who was deceased unfortunately, used to say that Europe needed to understand once and for all that they had to become a part of the solution and not the main part of the problem, which we were during the Cold War. Unfortunately, with the war in Ukraine, we have become once again a main part of the problem and definitely not a part of the solution. I think that the European Union in general, probably not with its most brilliant tactics and strategies, has done the right thing, and NATO probably a little better than the European Union, but also. I really do think that deterrence is the right path to peace. I'm not talking about an armed peace like in the years preceding the First World War. I am talking about the deterrence that kept the world from obliterating itself between 1945 and the end of the Cold War in 1990.
So you think there's no interest on either side in prolonging this war? You think there's a genuine interest on both sides in ending this war?
They both need to have a face-saving solution. It is going to be very difficult for both leaders to save face, and of course, Ukraine, no matter what people may say, is a democracy. So maybe President Zelensky suffers the same fate as Churchill. If he manages to get the country out of this war, even if he doesn't win the war, but not losing the war against Russia is already winning it, in my opinion, he might even lose the election. He might not be reelected. But it would be catastrophic for President Putin because he is not a democratically elected leader, no matter what people say. And a lot of very radical members of his trenches, let's call them what they are not going to be very happy if the peace does not include at least some things that could be sold to the Russian public as some kind of victory or face-saving solution. So both need to be very careful about what they agree to, and we really hope that hopefully in the future both will accept these terms that allow both to reach a peace settlement.
So we know already some of the requests that Ukraine is bringing to Istanbul, including a ceasefire of at least 30 days. Do you think Ukraine's requests are realistic?
Well, actually, the United States are pushing for 60 days, not only 30 days. Let's hope that it is the American version of the ceasefire that actually makes it through, and not just the 30-day ceasefire that the Ukrainians want to see. Because 30 days is not enough to consolidate the positions and the negotiating positions on the table that are required to be able to seek peace in a proper way. So I do think that let's hope that the Americans get their proposal approved by both sides, and that it is finally a 60-day ceasefire, not a 30-day ceasefire.
And now, final question. Now, looking ahead to these talks, as you mentioned, it's one of the earliest stages in this process. How do you envision the next few weeks, the few months playing out as a result of these talks?
Well, if either side do not accept an immediate ceasefire, we will see the Ukrainians attacking military positions of the Russian Federation deep into their territory, as they have done yesterday. And unfortunately, we will see the Russian Federation attacking civilian targets inside the Ukrainian territory. And this is, of course, a disgrace. It's a problem. It's a tragedy. We're seeing thousands of people still dying. We're seeing victims that are buying their daily provisions in markets or shops being massacred on the streets. We see that soldiers are dying by the hundreds and thousands on the front every day. And they're not just soldiers. I always say that everybody is innocent until proven otherwise. And soldiers are just performing their duty on one side and the other. and they have families, friends, sons, daughters, wives, and they are going to be widowed or orphaned, one side and the other. So this is a tragedy for both countries, and they are both actually putting in jeopardy the future generations. And I really think that both countries are going to have a very serious demographic problem in the next 15 or 20 years because of this war.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the programme and for your insightful analysis.
Thank you so much.
Well, that brings this edition of Context to a close. Face-to-face peace talks between Russia and Ukraine are still underway in Istanbul. This is the second time the countries have held direct talks in 3 years. The first meeting, just last month, lasted less than 2 hours and yielded no significant progress towards a lasting ceasefire. Analysts say there is little hope of a breakthrough today, as both countries remain far apart on how to bring the war to an end. Stay with us as we bring you the latest here on Context. Bye for now.